Oksana mentioned, I've been following, actually participating in the UN climate negotiations since 2008. So I thought in my talk I would lift up the curtain and I'll try to show something, what is actually happening behind the scenes, and share a few ideas about what's happening at the global climate governance levels, and why does not it fulfill. There's an echo. There's an echo going on. No? Yeah, it's okay, yeah. Okay, and why does not it fulfill our expectations of what the climate policy should be, require the urgency of the climate crisis and the polar crisis, and like show a few reasons why it fails in a way, but also maybe share some of the thoughts, what could be the way forward, what could be the way out of it. So this is just a very, I mean, we can speak a lot about the urgency of the climate action and why what's happening in the world now is happening. This is just an overview from the emergency weather and climate-related events happening actually last week. I think there's a lot written about it, there's a lot said about it. Two things I would like to emphasize and to underline is the fact that when we do speak about climate crisis, it's very often interconnected events, events which have long-standing and long-term consequences, and also events which, for example, launch a number of self-replicating and self-developing processes. Like we know the whole story about the melting permafrost, which is happening much quicker because of the growing average temperature, and then melting permafrost releases CO2 and methane, which in case makes the climate change even worse, right? Contributes more greenhouse gases. So, and this process is kind of unwrap quicker and stronger all over the world. Another process like this are wildfires. And maybe also a few further examples. There have been a few news about how climate is connected with water, is connected with economy, is connected with human well-being. For example, like this summer, once again, was one of the hottest summer on Earth, and like in the Northern Hemisphere. And we also see how, for example, hot and dry summers, they make less water available, but also less water for economies and less water for example, hydropower stations. And very often, hotter summers and droughts are also bringing in further economic issues, energy, put energy security under questions, put many communities, like millions of people, under threat. And this is an ongoing process, right? The complexity of the issue, long-term consequences, self-replicating events, crossing tipping points, like all of this is happening now. But I mean, this is once again the more kind of natural science and consequences of climate change, and also climate risks and negative climate consequences. So we know it's happening, we know it's dangerous, we know something needs to be done about that. Now, what is done about that? So basically, climate action happens at various levels, and I'll start with the international level. And the next event to come, actually in 3 weeks' time, is the next COP. COP is Conference of the Parties to the Paris Agreement. So this is the main UN-led process on global climate negotiations. COPs take place once every year. You see from the number 29, it's been happening for quite a number of years. And this is where countries' representatives meet to discuss various topics. So here I tried to summarize some basic data about the COP, which is about to happen in Baku, but also about the topics which are going to be discussed there. So what I think is also very important, especially with relation to the COP happening in Baku in Azerbaijan, which is a large oil and gas producing country, as all of us know, is that the first fact is that COP has been happening for the third year in a row in a fossil fuel producing country, right? So Egypt, Dubai, Baku. Now, many people ask me, why is it happening? It's happening, well, first of all, because the UN is deliberately neutral, and there's a system of rotation of the regions. And then whenever there's a certain region which has its, so to say, role, which got the card of being able to hold the COP, then a country within the region can volunteer to have a COP, because countries also co-finance these events. Now, another very important question, which is also connected to the COP in Azerbaijan, is the fact that there's a growing tension between the fact that we need to continue doing global climate action, and also we need to bring even more efforts together to solve global problems. At the same time as military conflicts appear, countries have more and more conflicts between themselves. And also, like many regimes are, totalitarian dictatorship regimes, or, and the question is, can you, for example, the very big question about Russia now, right? Especially following the international sanctions, following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is obviously, can you talk with Russia about environment and climate from the side of the Western countries? It's a huge topic. And likewise, it does not only concern Russia, right? Can you hold COP in Azerbaijan, which has terrible records on human rights? Azerbaijan, which has terrible records on human rights and oppression of oppositions, jailing, killing people. Like, can you talk about climate with such a political regime? It's a huge open question. There's no single answer. The UN says, yes, we can. Very, very often Western actors withdraw, like they don't talk about it. But anyway, I think everyone will be coming to Azerbaijan anyway. I would expect the Armenian delegation to be somewhat smaller or almost non-present. And, but other than that, everyone's coming there. And the third, I think, specifics of the COP in Azerbaijan, and this is also something which is, I think, maybe Svara Lipir, right, he was also saying about it, the fact that many countries now, not only India and Russia, are trying to instrumentalize the decolonial card. Interestingly, Azerbaijan has also been doing it. I mean, not many people know it, but following France supporting Armenia in the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, Azerbaijan started supporting a number of former French colonies or countries which still live under the French protectorate, mainly in the Pacific region. For example, half a year ago, protests in New Caledonia, right, they've been supported by Azerbaijan, which was a surprise to many, many people. Likewise, now for the COP, Azerbaijan says we'll pay for the delegations of Pacific nations, calling and naming specific Pacific nations that Azerbaijan is paying for. And all of these countries are once again, had strong connections with France, used to be former French colonies or something. So Azerbaijan is now trying to play the card. We are the decolonial power, right? And even though, once again, right, we don't forget, it's a huge oil and gas producer. It's a totalitarian regime which is very ruthless about its own political opposition and any kind of countries, any kind of criticism from within and from the outside. So you see some general statistics about the COP, 85,000 people in one place. It's like crazy, right? All these people fly to talk about climate, right? There are a lot of jokes about it, we will not go in here. 2 weeks, 150 heads of states and government. So this is like, this event is gonna turn maybe even more important than the UN General Assembly. And so what are they going to talk about? So here are some of the topics which I mentioned. Some of them may seem far too technical for you, but basically what does the COP give to us? First of all, general agreement of the countries, right, which is very often called COP cover decision. Where we are, where do we want to go? Surprisingly, last year in Dubai, it was the first time that fossil fuels have been named in the COP cover decision. For the first time ever, like 30 years. Many of you are younger than 30 years old. Countries have been talking about that. And fossil fuels have not been mentioned. Why? Because the countries are still, the countries especially producing fossil fuels, but also some of them importing fossil fuels, are against it, are against naming fossil fuels as the main enemy. So what a lot of countries' governments are willing to do, okay, we'll get together, we'll talk about climate, but we will not mention fossil fuels. Anyway, last year they were mentioned for the first time. Let's see what happens this year. Conclusion of the global stocktake. So that means what? That means where are we now? There are various estimations. According to Paris Agreement, countries first submitted their climate targets before 2030, and some of them have already achieved something, some of them have not achieved much. Now the question is, what have we achieved, where the world is, and where are we heading after this? Once again, to give you a few figures, if at the moment the world is on a track towards about 2.5, 2.9 temperature rise centigrade, mean world temperature rise. This is the path. The Paris Agreement target is 2 degrees and aiming towards 1.5 degrees. If there was no UN process, if nothing was done, if we would just continue economy as usual, business as usual, we would be on a track between 4 and 5. So this is just to give you where are we now. Right, new climate pledges, finance, a new collective quantified goal, that means money. Filling in loss and damage fund, that means money. A lot of climate negotiations are also about money and climate finance. The whole, like, streams of money coming from, first from the countries of the global north to climate foundations, and then later from these climate foundations to countries of the global south. So that's huge. Once again, I'll tell a bit later about this. There's a lot of game and about calculation. What do we count as climate finance? What do we don't count as climate finance? There's a lot of corruption, as always, but this is a big topic. So basically, COPs are about climate ambition. Talks are about big political statements. Talks are about, I expect Modi will be coming there and making another very big political statement on the role of the solar. And talks are about finance. There are a few other topics, including technologies, including business side, but yeah, 85,000 people are doing something during these 2 weeks, I have to tell you. So this is, right, this is a picture from Dubai last year. This is the way it usually looks. Everyone's happy in the end. And so just, very briefly, so who is coming to the COP? So this are kind of categories of participants in a COP. So this 85,000 of people usually belong to one of these categories, which you see listed on this slide. Now, what exactly will be done? So here's, for example, is the program for the COP in Baku, right? So you can see every day either has a topic, or every day, some days are also dedicated to heads of states and heads of government making big speeches, just like I'm doing now on the panel in front of the microphone, saying, we will proceed with fighting climate change, whatever. So there are also formal negotiations taking part, with the negotiators talking about climate finance, negotiators talking about, for example, that particular paragraph of Paris Agreement. How do we provide for accounting of emissions, verifying of accounting of emissions? So there's a lot of technical negotiations. So formal negotiations, informal negotiations, side events, which is huge. As you see in the previous slide, there are also, so basically the countries' delegations, right? They mostly are consisting of this first category, right? Ministries, politicians, public administration from the countries. And they're the one holding the negotiations. Then there are heads of states and big politicians coming, making big political speeches. And then there are a lot of people from academia, business, NGOs, activists who are organizing their own side events, right? Which is a parallel program. This is when they present, for example, critical view of the, particular country statement, or they present their own scenario of how things can go. So there is a lot of parallel events. There are also climate protests, like every day there are numerous climate protests. Now in Baku, as well as in Dubai, all outside climate protests are prohibited. So all climate protests can only take within the UN premises. So for the time of the conference, actually the sports stadium where the conference is taking place becomes UN territory, and UN legislation is being applied at this area. So protests are only allowed there, not outside. I mean, once again, if you speak about countries like Egypt, Dubai, and Azerbaijan, it's like that. And this is just a very funny picture. Down here you see a huge dinosaur on the left in the picture. So this is a daily anti-award, which is called Fossil of the Day. And the countries and delegations get this anti-award on a daily basis when they do something bad. fossil of the day. And there's a person in this dinosaur costume comes out, the scene is on, and they give this anti-award. So there's also a lot of celebration or anti-celebration happening in the COP. So anyway, it's a fun place to go to. It's also a sad place to go to. Another probably very interesting fact, so how negotiations are organized. Very often countries negotiate not on their own, but in negotiation groups. And here I list the main groups. There are also a few smaller ones, but this is the main negotiation blocks. And you can see G77 in China, right, G77 is like mostly like countries of the global south, plus China. And well, China is mentioned specifically, and China is very often taking a lead role and speaks on behalf of them, right? See, once again, the whole idea of, trying to take up the whole decolonization agenda in our own hands. Right, there are a number of other groups. Well, obviously the Arab states have, oil-producing countries have their own interests. EU is its own group. Obviously, least developed countries and small island developing states, the most vulnerable to climate change, right? The countries whose whole existence is under question because of the climate change, right? They have their own group. And then there's umbrella group, like a number of countries which, Russia used to be in the umbrella group, and then following the war in Ukraine, it got kicked out of the umbrella group. So now it's kind of on its own, right? Now, so now very other important question. So when countries speak about climate action, like what is climate action? So first of all, which actors can take climate action? We spoke a lot about international level, but most of climate action is actually done on the national level and all other levels, right? It can be done at the level of cities, at the level of companies, local communities, but also, scientists contribute a lot, activists contribute. So there are many actors of climate action we can speak about. And likewise, what are the areas of climate action? Well, there are two main traditional areas. Climate mitigation is bringing emissions down, and climate adaptation is obviously adapting to climate change. An interesting fact is that on the first slide, you saw this loss and damage fund. Like, loss and damage is also a very crucial component of the whole climate agenda. There are certain consequences of climate change to which you can still adapt, and there are many consequences to which you cannot adapt anymore. Like, a great percentage of the coral reef will be lost forever. Many forests will burn forever. Some island states will lose their territory, forever. Nothing is forever, but, for their whole lifetime, so to say, right? And the question is, who's going to pay for it? And what are we doing about it? Like, what are we doing with all these people? That's a lot of questions. So, right, so this is climate mitigation, climate adaptation. Resilience building is also crucial. In a way, you build your infrastructure, you build your societies, you build your economy, so that it's potentially prone to climate change and negative consequences of climate change. And obviously climate finance. There are countries who pay to international climate finance projects. There are countries which receive money. There are some countries which are kind of outside it. For example, there are countries which, like countries of the global north, they have to pay an ODA, official development assistance. And now more and more of official development assistance goes together with the climate action. So a lot of money which was earlier spent just for general economic development are now just paying at climate plus development, right? So in one package. Right, so these are the main areas of climate action. But, however, like we're trying to analyze political process as they are, and we're trying to look beyond statements and beyond documents and beyond legislation. So what could the real extra motivation be? Everyone speaks about climate, but very often why countries do something on climate is because they have another motivation or extra motivation. And I tried to mention a few of these extra motivations on this website, right? Countries can be interested, for example, in cleaner air, like China is, because we realize what kind of damage it brings to economy, people's health, and countries can be interested in energy security. If countries don't have their own sources of energy and they want to become more energy independent, climate is obviously a topic they can proceed with. So these are some of the, so to say, second-tier motivation, but hidden motivation, but very often in like real climate politics, international climate politics, this plays the main role, even though it's not being spoken of as such. So there are a few. Now, here on this slide, I tried to mention many reasons. Well, not many, I mean, the ones which could fit into this slide. why the climate process is not as quick, as efficient, international climate process, but also sometimes national climate action, as we want it to be. I will not comment on all of this. I will start with probably something referring to what Ian was saying yesterday in his presentation, and I think I also said it straight away in my comment after it. In a way, climate change, it's a complex system issue. And we're still trying to deal with climate change and with polycrisis with the methods of governance which are built on division. Division of power, division of sectors, division of money, economic branches. Various motivations, very often competing. Like if you imagine a country with various ministries, right? For example, the Ministry of Transport is saying, we need more money to build roads, we need more money to build roads. And then the Ministry of Housing says, we need more money to build houses or whatever. Ministry of Finance says, no money, never have any money, nothing is coming out of the budget anymore. We need to cut down on our costs. And then the Environmental or Climate Ministry would say, we need more climate action. But we still think and we still govern in a very divided way. And it's also one of the problems. So the whole global world complexity and the whole kind of system connected, right? How climate change affects us energy production, affects us energy consumption, water, how it's all interconnected, right? It's all about nexuses. It's not really fully implemented in the current governmental and governance systems. And that is probably one of the main faults of the system. So we need system-based government. We need also, I mean, we do have some very interesting economic models. I think I mentioned degrowth there on this side or the next side. There's a lot of talks about degrowth, for example, zero growth, degrowth models. And also like from an economic point of view, especially if we speak of a country which has zero demographic growth or negative demographic growth, you would think, why not, right? We have less people than we used to have. Why can't we live on a degrowth model when we think about public prosperity and not economic growth in figures? However, sometimes what looks good in models still doesn't look good in real life. Because our whole economic system, our whole financial systems, which people very often forget, right? You're always connected with the banks, which always are about growth, interest rates. You need always money back on your investment fund involved, pension fund involved, and especially if you have aging population, which have, once again, it's a huge issue for countries with demographic growth. The question is, how do you build new economic models based on degrowth or zero growth? So once again, beautiful economic models. I also take part in all of these debates, however, not realized so far. And once again, it's also not easy to realize a completely new economic model in a particular country. I mean, some countries have tried, right? Soviet Union has tried, North Korea is trying now. But overall, it's hard because the money is global, right? However it was, treated. It's hard to withdraw from this economic model and say we'll be doing differently, right? Some countries are doing, like, Buen Vivir in Ecuador, Nepal, and its Brutto National Happiness Index instead of global GDP, Gross National Product. Experiments. There's a lot of experiments happening. This is actually what gives hope, right? There are experiments. There is thinking going on in audiences like this. There's a lot of talk. Experiments, but how to scale up experiments and how to rebuild global economic financial system, it's a big question. I need to wrap up, right? Okay. Okay, so what gives hopes? Once again, I already mentioned what gives hopes, a number of experiments, economic, but also experiments, for example, with, even here in Germany, right? There are experiments with, for example, energy-sufficient villages. There are experiments with, zero waste villages. There are experiments worldwide with eco-communities, eco-settlements, whatever. The question is, if you have a village of 40 people and you build up a very beautiful, sustainable, almost, carbon emissions-free way of life, can you extrapolate it to a city of 20 million? And if we speak about the global world, also the global south, where population continues growing, cities continues growing, right? The question is, what do you apply there? But anyway, something happening. I also, personally, I think there's a lot happening in climate litigation. So companies being sued, states being sued for climate inaction. So there's happening a lot, but it's also happening backwards. Now, as you know, there's a huge legal debate in the US with an oil company suing Greenpeace, which is the largest ever Greenpeace legal action it has through its own life, for opposing to build an oil pipeline. Likewise, today I read in the news that Exxon is suing Dutch government for terminating the contract on oil extraction before the end of the contract. So, but there's a lot happening, right? So for a number of years, a lot of climate litigation was happening on the side of activists, scientists, people of a particular country suing companies and states. Now there's also backlash, but we'll have to see. So I think a few other ideas which I thought I would mention here can potentially give hope. And right, what else is needed? Oh my God, I made a few word clouds of what else could be needed. I spoke about quite a lot of things already. We can speak more about that. And I would probably, I'll probably stop here. So thank you for your attention.
Looking at this word cloud, there is artificial intelligence missing. So my question concerns how this coming COP in Baku will address the issue of energy-intensive digital technologies, more specifically how the development of large language models that requires even more resources matches with the climate goals.
Is Greta Thunberg invited to these kind of talks, I wonder? Because she's a quite symbolic activist and quite focused in these subjects. And also, when you said about possible, let's say, positive, constructive solutions of degrowth or universal basic income or these other, other systems of natural resources community, the climate litigations, and it seems to me it's all very linked to the economic system more than actually what's the climate change about, or maybe the real problems, the real sources, what happens to the lives of people, animal, the planet itself, the natural planet. I mean, when we see the activist plan, there is no planet B, for example, no? That is, I mean, it's quite a strong statement and it's not taken in consideration at all. It's all about these politicians doing their theater or something, talking about their businesses as usual, and what is the option? I think we have to talk about maybe a system that is not capitalism anymore. And all these experiments that you're saying, well, there are experiments. I think possibly it's a way maybe to think about that. Because obviously capitalism is about exploitation of the resources. So how you match that with the climate change and resolve that?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my kind of worldview and how I view climate change is obviously very different from what's going on in the COP29. But I'm wondering if there's this, because when I think from this geopolitical perspective for nation states coming together, I think about this techno-optimism of space, international space program, and how different nations would come together for a common goal to colonize the space, blah blah blah. So I wonder if there is there is presence of any trace of this kind of techno-optimism to come together for for example fusion energy or something like this, a big technological project that is has this very utopian but also kind of let's put our differences aside and come together for this utopian techno-optimism, blah blah blah.
So yeah, very quickly. You just talked about nexuses and divisions, yeah. And that sort of resonated with all my thinking about interfaces that I'm trying to grapple with. Thank you for an amazing talk. This seems to me to be indispensable. Is there any way that you think, given your knowledge of all these processes, one can identify key points of nexus into which people like us might usefully feed in terms of values and changing ideas? It's a huge amount of complex processes, and the idea of agency within all these processes if you're not a state is very problematic. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about nexuses, and I'm asking that in the light of all my thinking about a politics of interface.
Wow, it's such a difficult task to answer all of this shortly, but okay, I will. AI. Right, big topic. On one hand, we see how energy inefficient AI is, right? How much energy is needed for all the AI tools and AI models and IT sector in general. It's a topic within the negotiations. It's not a separate topic. It's a topic. It's also, I think it's a growing concern. But all in all, I mean, it comes up in emissions, because there's like emissions counting, right? And then you can also realize which emissions come from which sector. And then also AI will be reflected in the energy sector of the country's carbon emissions inventories. Right, so I would say the short answer, it is a growing concern. But I think there's still no clear understanding like what can be done with it. Here, once again, there are various experiments. For example, countries trying to bring big data centers and AI centers closer to where, for example, to hydropower dams, right? Where you have, for example, the way hydropower works, right? You cannot start it and stop it immediately. But very often when you have a big mass of water in the reservoir and then it comes down the dam, you suddenly have a lot of energy, right? And then you use all these energy storage facilities. And so what many companies are doing and trying to build, for example, closer to dams, or they're trying to somehow think how you can put it somewhere where there are large, so there's less energy transportation involved, for example. Or put it next to a solar park in the desert, right? That could be like another solution that I heard of. But overall, yeah, I mean, there are discussions going about it, but I cannot say much more than this, right? There's growing concern, but yeah. Greta Thunberg. I think Greta was invited, especially invited to a number of COPs. Like I think the last COP she was invited was in Madrid in shortly before the Corona, 2019. But to many COPs she just comes on her own, because very often you don't need to be invited to go to a COP, right? You can get registered and just come to a COP. I think Greta is also someone who is willing to travel sustainably, so she's always trying to travel on land. It's a bit hard to travel on land to Azerbaijan, because also Azerbaijan has all of its land borders closed. You can only fly into the country. I don't think she was specifically invited, but and whether she comes, I don't know. But she can also like come on her own. Now the whole question of like solutions and life of people and the whole crisis of capitalism. I mean, right, I mean, exactly the same ideas and exactly the same wording you can read everywhere, you can hear from experts, from activists also at the COP. The question is then, what can be done? Like, if you speak about lives of people and how lives of people and animals change, that very often comes into the whole topic of climate adaptation. Like, how do we adapt human life and also like animal life to changing climate? So that comes under the climate adaptation, and the whole change of system, like this, a very slogan which you see everywhere on climate COPs, like system change, not climate change. Once again, where do you start and how do you proceed with changing the systems? I was trying to show some of the ways, some of the experiments which are at least trying to change the system, because changing the system, especially if we speak about global system, once and like completely new, is just a process I think most people are not ready for. So it's like, how do you do it, right? How do you change the way banks work? Like, sorry that I speak so much about economy, but it's just because a lot of political action we perceive, for example, from media, is all about statements. But a lot of political action in reality is all about economy or about businesses or about energy generation or about, so it's very often comes to the economy. So this is why I speak so much about it. Techno-optimism, colonize the space. Well, there are actually, I mean, from what I hear from the space debate, the whole idea of building human settlements on the moon and on the Mars are there. And also the whole ideas of extracting minerals from moon are more than there. So this is obviously the next step. And you see it from the governmental actors, but you also see it from someone like Elon Musk, right? And similar companies which appear. So the ideas are there. Whether they will be realized, well, it looks like in current conditions, sooner or later, yes. I mean, whatever we think of it, right? It's, this is where it's going now. Now, techno-optimism. Well, yeah, there is a lot of techno-optimism. There's a whole parallel programs with many companies presenting technical solutions to climate change. There's a whole fair of companies and climate solutions and exhibition pavilions and various kinds of robots and technology solutions all showing. Yeah, there's a lot of technological optimism. So, and there's a lot of presentation of technological solutions. So whether the world can come to one single idea where everyone can join, and I would say within the current political contradictions that exist in the world, it's difficult. It's very difficult. At the moment, it looks like there will be further national projects, maybe cross-border national projects, and company projects appearing. Fusion, I would say nuclear fusion is not more like a idealistic idea. It's already something which is like almost there, right? So probably see growth of that within the next few years. But I don't see an overall idea will come, especially now. It got worse. It got much, much worse in the last 5 years, I would say, than it used to be before. So now it's back again. What is now national interest? And once again, the question here is who defines national interest? Is it the government, or is it the elites, or companies' interest, right? So it's all getting separated. Unfortunately, this is what's happening. The question is, once again, what can we do, right? We, as the people who are trying to analyze these projects and think about them. Ian, Nexus. Oh my God, this is such a good, big question. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer it. But there are also various kinds of nexuses, right? There can be one, for example, resource/economic nexuses, right? From like water, agriculture, forestry, energy. So this could be like one nexus. But there can be many, many other nexuses, also the ones which involve, for example, I think are all about that, like priorities or values, like what is important, like lifestyles. And I think there are numerous nexuses and numerous models being built now. I almost have a feeling at this very point, the first level of decision is the decision for yourself, right? What can you do in this system, right? What interests you? What can you do? Where you can make a change, where you know something about, and how you can build it in some of the nexuses, and what is your role? And then probably the next level is like your community, your colleagues, and like up. But there are, right, various nexuses. Yeah, sorry that I'm not too specific about it, but I just don't know how to approach this topic, like it's a very short answer. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.